Manuel Martinez, how are you?
Well, Jesus, you?
All right, Manuel. Audience has a series of questions regarding your book 22, The War of the Gods. This theme, which we've discussed before, brings up questions about the significance of numerology. They're curious about why you chose the number 22 and how it might relate to the cards of light and darkness.
Well, look, yes, we have touched on it a few times, but I don't know if we have gone in depth in the book. What are the different parts of the book? As I have seen it, some emails that are asking us. So today we're going to try to explain what the book is, what the numerology is, what the tarot cards are inside the book, if you like. Why 22? The book starts from the premise that the protagonist of my story, Dr. Kamot, when he dies, has two options. Like in my book, it is said that everyone has to or go to the light or go to the dark. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of going to the light or going to the dark? Throughout the book, we are going to find out if you are a person of light or a person of darkness. So Dr. Komode decides to go to the light because he believes he has always been a person of light. What is the main difference between light and darkness? Well, we all know that for there to be light, there has to be darkness. Because if everything was light, what would be the point of the things that we do? And what is life, this life of ours? We know that it is part light and part darkness, but for all of humanity. Humanity always thinks that we are in times of darkness, even though we are living in times of light. So my book tries to explain through a novel those possibilities. What are, by the questions we are asked, the biggest differences between going to the light or going to the dark? As I tell you, Dr. Kamote, when he dies, goes to the light. He could also have chosen to go to the dark. What happens to us, to sapiens, to human beings when we die, if we go to the light, to the dark? One thing my book makes clear is that once you choose darkness, you never go back to the light. That's clear.
What in that decision, what are you decreeing and determining in your characteristic as a being, as a spirit, so that you say, I have chosen darkness, there will never be again? That would be the point of no return?
Look, in my book, light and darkness are the same thing from the point of view of what is light or what is darkness. A person who is part of the darkness does not mean that he is a bad person. He can be a very good person. What happens is that he is a person who does not accept the limitations imposed by the light. That is, it is a person. To return to terms that people who listen to us understand, the law of karma. There are those who believe in karma, and then there are those who don't. Karma is considered good, since whatever goes well, you have to eventually pay for. If you've done bad deeds, they will eventually circle back to you in life, and you will have to pay for them. This is the belief of someone who is within the light. However, a person who chooses darkness does not have karma. They reject karma. The karma simply does not apply to them. Based on the theories in my book, karma no longer applies to such a person. Essentially, that individual arrives with much more freedom to act according to what they deem appropriate. It might appear correct to them, yet seem incorrect to others. But that doesn't mean it is inherently wrong. People who are lighthearted tend to be considerably influenced by specific behaviors and particular ethics. Someone who dwells in darkness might respect these behaviors and ethics, but they aren't obligated to follow them. Consequently, we will discover that, returning to one of our preferred subjects, politicians are seldom encountered, a politician of light. They are all of darkness. They all come from dark. It is like a very special class within that darkness, like many other things that are close to the serene power. The light does not serve them. They use light to bring darkness. That's one of my favorite themes in my book, using light to bring darkness. And I mentioned to you cases like churches, religions, dramatic cases like the Inquisition that use light to bring deep darkness into the world. What is a person of light and what is a person of darkness? Well, as I mentioned, a politician is a person of total darkness. The end for him justifies the means. And you see that in all kinds of politicians. It doesn't have to be a politician or a dictator, but one of the so-called Democrats, because they do the same thing. They use whatever they want to achieve the results. And any example I give you of a politician, well, that's it. You will not see anything else without justifying the means. So I consider these people to be of darkness. Be careful. This does not mean that this person is not ultra-religious, even if he is of dark. Because you can use your own religions as much for the light as for the darkness. In fact, throughout history, religions have been used much more for darkness than for light. As I was saying, using light to bring darkness into the world. So starting from that premise, when Dr. Kamote dies, my protagonist decides that he is going to continue with the light, that he is going to continue working with his karma, paying for the problems of previous lives to try to solve them, to improve them in his next life. And again, here we are at a point where there are people who believe and do not believe in reincarnation, do not believe or believe in past lives, that each person has the freedom to believe what they choose. I simply explained to you in my novel. In my novel, it begins with the premise that reincarnation exists. And the number 22 is significant, as we will explore later, because it represents the number of gods that initiate creation. It is not just a single god, but rather 22 gods or energies. You can think of them as energies that come together and bring about what we know as humanity. They begin their experiments. Initially as plants, then progress to animals, until eventually, well, they become whatever you envision them to be. We can call them sapiens or human beings, but what about these gods? These gods, after having experienced the earth, after having been minerals, after having been animals, well, these gods have picked up characteristics of those animals that then have taken them to be part of what we are now then. Humans, human beings, men, women, because their energy of those gods themselves, when they put that energy inside all of us, and that energy comes back to them, that energy comes back contaminated and comes back contaminated with all the positive and negative characteristics of the beings that inhabit this earth. So it is a very common phrase to say, you behave like an animal. But well, of course, if we have been animals, that is why we behave like animals, because those characteristics have been rooted within. Is one of the premises of my book, is that that energy was already contaminated for both good and bad.
Yes, Manuel, in this part where you are expressing that, these gods, these energies come here to this plane, and we are as a complementary part of what is their learning experience at the level of energetic experience. Is that what you are referring to?
Yes, of course, they split, call it into souls or whatever you want, and that goes into our bodies, both animals and later of people. Then when that energy, that is to say, with our death ends, that energy returns to the origin, but that energy already returns contaminated. Returns contaminated by the experiences we have had. That energy, we could no longer say a clean energy, is already a contaminated energy by successive and successive reincarnations. And millions and millions and billions of people who have experienced that original energy of the 22 gods. And here I start from the Jewish Kabbalah, when in the Jewish Kabbalah they tell you that God, they of course believe in one God creates the world. And for that he originally creates 6 lakh souls. They believe that God continues to create souls. My theory is different. I believe that those souls is the theory that I explain in my book, is divided in 10, that is from each original soul. You know what I mean? I mean, they say that God creates 6 lakh souls. It's in the Zohar. I believe from different readings that the original idea was to create 1 million souls. 1 million souls. That 1 million souls was the concentrated energy of the 22 gods divided into 1 million souls. They go to earth, have an experience, but there comes a time when that experience becomes too small for them. So what do they decide? Well, when we expand from 1 to 10 million souls, the experiences, of course, begin to be significantly greater. But along with this, both the good and the bad also increase. Consider this: when people say that often you feel distant from God, I always use the example of a person. Let's say you, an entrepreneur who creates their own store. Imagine yourself opening a McDonald's hamburger store. You own a single store, just one, and it feels too small since you have mastered it all. So you decide to grow from 1 store to 10. You have the capability to increase your store count from 1 to 10. But then what happens? What kind of control did you have with 1 store? You probably had complete control over it, knowing every detail. With 10 stores, you must now spread your focus, not just on this one, but across all 10 stores you wish to manage. With which you begin to lose control. And that is what I say happens to the gods. For each original soul, first they create 10, then those 10 in turn create other 10, with which we already have 100 stores. 100 souls. Those 100 souls in turn want to grow badly and multiply it by 10. So they already have 1,000 stores. They continue to grow. They go to 10,000 stores. They want to continue to grow. They go to 1 lakh. And finally, with 1 lakh stores, what control does the original soul have over those 1 lakh souls or stores? The power is diluted as he lost control, and the souls expanded to his size. So my theory in the book is that humanity can reach 10,000 million people, which is the million souls. When they reach 1 lakh each and can't grow more, there would be.
That's where the relationship is. What relationship could there be in these numbers that you're giving us and numerology? And why do you use numerology in your book? And starting with the number 22.
Well, the 22, I start with 22 for the fact that I believe that originally there are 22 gods, of which I give the name, who are the ones that gather the energies of all of them to generate all these souls, these million original souls. From there begin the divisions between the gods themselves. And later, is when comes the famous rebellion of the gods. I used to say that there is a part of the gods that rebels against the origin of these souls and how these souls are being educated. This is known in the Bible as the Lucifer rebellion. The Bible describes it as Lucifer's rebellion, where Lucifer signifies the brightest angel, the angel of light. He rebels in the Bible against the Creator. In my book, Lucifer's rebellion is portrayed as an intellectual rebellion. That is, initially, there are 7 gods out of those 22 who oppose the original unity they had formed. Why? Because they are considered to be given to human beings, the people who are inhabiting those souls, a series of characteristics. The gods are given a set of characteristics, 11 positive and 11 negative. And the original idea of the experiment is to see if these beings that have been created are more given to light or to darkness. So the rebellion of these 7 gods is against gun control, but to let free will decide whether what has been created is more prone to light or darkness. In the beginning, well, the souls, as I say, already lose control. That is, if you have one and you have become 1 lakh, that soul A would be your God, is already away from you. With 1 lakh, you no longer have access that you had in the beginning when it was just 1. And when you go to 10, you can still continue to have some control over the evolution. When you get to 100, less and less, it's that one's control. When you get to 1,000, still much less. When you get to 10,000, then much less. And those 10,000 souls times 1 million are the ones that end up giving that 10,000 million people that can live together on earth, which I don't think the population will ever go beyond that. From 10,000 million, we are getting to 8,000 million. Those souls come and go, but through this rebellion, you create like 2 places. The place of learning, let's say it's the place of light, what we would call in Christian terms either heaven or purgatory, where they live and learn before they come back to earth again. And you have the place, the scanning place, which I say is a place of exploration. Scanning place where those souls go also to learn and to explore, but they leave aside moral principles, but they are purely what they are. Then, when these souls come back to earth and face each other, then each will choose their prevailing positions. A soul of darkness will normally seek power. A soul of light, as it still has beliefs in karma or that good deeds that it has to answer in the end to a creator something, its deeds will be of a different category. Here the difference is between light and darkness, in that the people of the light have to give explanations at the end of their life of what they have done, what they have achieved. If the mission they came for has been done and achieved, then what they have used to do it. In the dark, you don't have to explain anything. Your success or failure is measured by what you have achieved in this lifetime. If you are a being of the darkness and you are eager in this life, then in the darkness they will continue to treat you as a beggar, because they will notice that this soul is no longer giving more of itself. If that beggar comes to the light, they will try to rehabilitate him, to get him to have a better life in his next life and to get something more. In the darkness, on the contrary, if a Hitler turns you to darkness or a Stalin, There he is received as a genius for all the evil he has done and brought. The evil that is part of the original idea of creation, if we were more prone to good or evil, is going to show that evil is much stronger than light. And it is the struggle that there is between the gods. When you say, on the one hand, there is God and the devil, there is always a counterforce. When we talk about Manu's Manichaeism, he said that God had created the world, he had created the souls, but that the evil, the darkness, had been created by, so that people understand us by the devil. And then the human being lived in a body created by the devil, in which there was a soul created by God, and that soul was not able to adapt to live in that body. And for that, we have to go to Genesis. I mean, all this is novelized. It is novelized, but it is in Genesis. That is when the giants come, who are supposedly Lucifer's rebellion and who fall to earth. They see the women of the earth and they find them beautiful, and then they have relations with them and give origin to the race of the Titans. That is in Genesis. That is not my invention. I novelize it, but it is part of this theory that I developed in the book, that there are two types of people in the world, people of light and people of darkness. Who is winning the war in my book? Clearly darkness. People of power are people of darkness. As I tell you, as much as we are painted by the goodness of some of our leaders, I would like to see a country where a single leader was a person of light, even if he was a very coherent person. In a Scandinavian country with 6 million inhabitants that everybody is well off, you would have to see what is the purpose of that person to get that.
Manuel, could you possibly explain in detail how the term scanning place is translated into English, literally?
Place of exploration. There is a place of learning for the light and a place of exploration for the dark. Scanning comes from scanning the brain, exploring it, and I have translated it as exploration. But the original title, as the novel was written in English, is scanning because it makes more sense. The current situation, we already understand what scanning is. Before, maybe it was not understood. Today it is. Through the process of scanning, you undergo a scan and they observe everything within your brain, including all the potential problems that may reside in the dark scanning area. It's a continuous scan, always scanning you to propel you forward. Each time you return to Earth, you're advancing, taking one step closer to the darkness. And I must emphasize, you can express it in various forms, but ultimately, it is the power that truly matters. A soul of darkness is very successful, has been a politician, has generated respect because he can be that, but he has been leading people to his ends, which can be throughout history any kind of end. A soul of darkness, as I tell you, could be a pope. But he managed to bring a lot of souls to them. What methods did this pope use? Well, we have seen what is throughout history. The methods that popes have used to gain power, they have done everything they told people not to do. If you go to the Middle Ages, to the modern age, how the popes were, we don't have to go very far to go to World War II. How the church, knowing what was going on with the Holocaust, did not even raise its voice when the church had, as we saw when we talked about Hitler, had cardinals, had bishops in all the places where those massacres were taking place. What are those popes? Light, darkness. These are the questions. That's why I tell you, My novel can be very crude because it asks these questions. A pope who allows that in the name of a supreme God, who he thinks is the supreme God, but he allows that Holocaust. And he doesn't raise his voice for fear of another soul of darkness, because we will be able to say that Hitler was not at the height of the Pope of Rome or Pius XII. It is that they were different. In what respect? In a way, it is hard to say, but they were connected. These are questions that are asked in the novel through the characters, and that it is very difficult to give them an answer. I leave it open to each person to think what they want. But why Pio 12? Oh, Pope is a person of light. Knows he is opening a Holocaust and allows it. What differentiates him at the end of Hitler? He was a cover-up, like all the Nazi cover-ups. The German people were part of that darkness. You can't call them people of light, even if we try to convince ourselves. My novel explores this, showing we're all guilty due to inaction or cover-up, but ultimately we're all guilty. Yet, you might ask, who could stand up to Hitler? People couldn't, because he would have killed them. What could you do in a situation like that? But the Pope had a certain authority with the millions and millions of Catholics in Europe to oppose that. But the Pope was afraid. Remember that the first thing Hitler did was to make a concordat with the church, the German church, with Robbie's Pope. And nothing happened there. Nothing happened there. Everybody turned a blind eye. I don't see anything. Yes, they claim, but people exaggerate. Then we saw what those exaggerations entailed. Naturally, we noticed that during the discussion of the Hitler chapter, both are equally guilty. One is the brutal one committing the acts, while the others, out of fear, do nothing. But of course, the book questions, what could they do? In Germany, very little. Very little in Germany. What could you do against that? Was it to oppose Hitler? Was it to go to a concentration camp or a firing squad? So that's where the strength of darkness is demonstrated in my novel, where darkness uses all the resources it has at its disposal. The light is more timorous. The light wants to follow rules, a way of functioning. Normally, if you see our societies are governed by principles of light rather than by principles of darkness, although many are those principles of light, to give more power to darkness. When we talk about democracies, when we talk about this and we look at the Democrats that we have ruling, and Democrats they are now in the 20th century, in the 21.0, but before, throughout history, there was nothing like that. When there has been a serious democracy, there has never been a serious democracy. Already in the 20th century, there have started to be more serious or relatively serious democracies. Because democracy always pursues, let's say, in theory, everybody has the same opportunities. But, well, you can tell that to a child that everybody has the same opportunities. It is not the same. To be born in New York, in a family in Manhattan with resources, than to be born in Mexico City, in Tepito, or to be born in Harlem, in New York, versus a family that was born in Manhattan. The principles of democracy is what the darkness says. Look very nice on paper, but in reality, they are not so. And we try to take advantage of them to achieve our objectives. That is part of the philosophy of the book, of this struggle between light and darkness. That's where we get to what is how this war begins. And in my book, the light and the dark decide to start a game that they are going to play through the 22 cards of the major arcana of the tarot. There are 11 cards for light and 11 cards for darkness. And each card has to demonstrate the positive progress towards light or darkness. All the letters go back to their origin, that is, letters of light. I have Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Shakespeare, in short, important characters that have Martin Luther King, that have brought something towards the light, because all those characters have led us towards light and darkness. Who do I have? Well, I have Hitler, I have Stalin, I have Mao Zedong. In short, I have Napoleon, I have Cleopatra. What is the contribution of that? The contribution leads to a much darker humanity. What cards have they played? Well, if we observe the world today, the dark cards have prevailed. While Hitler was defeated and democracy emerged, Stalin came, and though the Soviet Union fell, now we have Putin. So what has really changed? What has changed in the world? If we examine it, China remains, as seen in one chapter, with Mao Zedong's legacy. China has evolved, it has evolved a lot, and it has evolved with darkness. And look at the economic power that is there. Because right now, if you talk to any person, you are going to ask China, what is light or darkness? I'm sure most people will tell you it's darkness. Darkness for 1,450 million people who have the second largest economy in the world and very soon the first, and have come through darkness. Western Europe, which is light or darkness, well, throughout all of history, Europe has been pure darkness. Only recently, after the Second World War, we can say that they are trying to see the light, but they are already contaminated by darkness. These are the characteristics of my book, that if you have already been contaminated by darkness, wanting to be light is very difficult. So a continent like the European continent that is used to religious wars, to massacres, to holocausts, what remains for them now? They are all considered people of light. In other words, it serves as a critique to these sapiens, who believe we are something significant when, throughout our history, as mentioned last week in Harari's book, we have done nothing but cause destruction, yet we still think of ourselves as beings of light. My novel and the philosophy within it stands in opposition to all of that. There is very little of that light remaining because it has been tainted by darkness. And now that darkness is what surrounds us today, leaving us trapped. And that is why we see the social situations that exist, the racism, the machismo. In short, are things that have been intimately linked to this sapiens that has been evolving, to this sapiens, to this creation of the gods that have evolved. Because I tell you, the gods themselves evolved it. They did not make us in their image and likeness at the beginning. They created us, as I tell you. And they experimented being stones, being animals, being these little monkeys that we have come down from the tree, and we have been the most predatory being ever. Oh, have we changed? Now, we do the same, but differently. They hide more. In the 15th century, the Inquisition killed whoever opposed it or wanted their money. Remember, you don't need to be a genius to know the Inquisition. Both the Catholic churches starting in the 13th century and the Spanish in the 15th century is like today's Catholic Church's Inquisition from the 15th century. They would be a political police like the KGB or the Stasi, or Pinochet's political police, or our political police. That was the Inquisition, the Crown's political police. The Crown desired this. From the opposing count saying, I will get rich with your money, this guy is a heretic, a witch, burn him and all his goods become mine. So what I'm conveying through my book is the story. I am not an anthropologist or a genius like Harari who tries to explain it to you. No, I am more straightforward, but also more direct. What I'm trying to say is, this is how it is. I mean, why was the Inquisition there? Well, it was there because it satisfied the rulers, those who were in power. Were they people of light or people of darkness? Well, I can't say for sure. I leave that to you, our viewers, to decide. To me, all those feudal lords who had castles that raised were beings of darkness, regardless of how many crosses they carried, no matter how many crosses, when discussing the Templars going there. Were they beings of light or darkness? In my novel, they're all beings of darkness because they try to impose beliefs. How can you be a being of light when you impose the cross on non-believers? Or when you impose the crescent on those who don't believe in it? How do you see yourself as a being of light and there sanctifying yourself and masses or others praying? And do they see themselves as beings of light with the absolute truth? Not in my view. To me, they are all the same. Deep down, they represent the triumph of darkness. And what we're experiencing now is a triumph of darkness, measured, adapted to the 21st century. What will remain in the 22nd century from all this? Well, everything will end and it will be all doctrines of science. As we discussed with Harari the other day, we'll believe in a God that is science itself. Everything else that they have been teaching us throughout all these millennia and the last centuries will eventually just be an anecdote. It will remain merely an anecdote. When we now discuss the primitive men who believed in multiple gods, like the god of light, the god of fire, the god of the sea, and the god of thunder, future generations will view us as primitive beings because the only God that will exist will be the God of science. But in my novel, will this God of science be swayed by the light or the dark? Perhaps the dark, as it might have won this war. And I say, many might disagree, insisting good triumphs over evil. But what defines good and evil? I mean, what truly are good and evil? Is good attending church every Sunday to pray? I'm not sure. That's considered good. And to believe that there is a paradise when you die, that there is purgatory, or that there is a hell. All these people have already given us on earth through the centuries. So, why do you need hell? If we have had the Inquisition, if we have had Hitler, if we have had Stalin, what more hell do we need? I mean, even after that, we're going to get more hell from the brown people. These are the things that are raised in my novel. But are four of us willing to put up with it? Is everything going to be hell? Have you slaughtered yourself in this life? Are you going there in my book? Are you going to the light or are you going to the dark? Well, if you're back to the light, then you are willing again to die for some ideas. I don't know if you understand me. For example, the Jewish people, well, they had their ideas. They were there and they still believed in Jehovah and all that. Very admirable. Very admirable, but the darkness wiped them out, or a big part of them, 6 million of them. So Those are part of everything that is my novel, through the different characters that are discussing and seeing where humanity is going, whether towards the light, towards the darkness, and all based carefully on historical facts, because I base my work on history. When I go to some characters, when I go to the time of Cleopatra, here we have already talked about Cleopatra in this program. What was the time of Cleopatra? The history, how the empire advanced. Precisely Cleopatra was the cause of the origin of the Roman Empire. When in the battle in the year 28 before Christ, the troops of Octavian Augustus defeated the troops of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in the Battle of Artios, and Octavian Augustus became the first Roman emperor before there was a republic, and from there they moved to empire. And that is because of a woman. So these are very curious things, but they change history. And was it a woman? That woman who was of light or of darkness? Clearly she was of darkness. And so as we journey through history, Harari takes a different approach. I employ a method, as I often say, that is more straightforward, more, I don't know. Perhaps I am a writer with a rougher edge, not as refined as he is to articulate what humanity truly is. To me, humanity appears to have always been a struggle primarily for power, solely for power. And in the end, power everywhere has implemented its ideas, whether they are good or bad. Because yes, look what it has caused people to advance throughout history, but they have not advanced. In many cases, because the people in power considered it was necessary, that the people deserved it. It was not necessary. It's the motto of darkness, to change certain things so that everything remains the same. And if you look through history, those who have had the power have always been the same. For centuries were the kings, the counts, the nobles, all these people. And power passed from father to son. The peasant, as we were saying the other day in the chapter of Harari, when they explained the happiness of a peasant was satisfied with having his land and being able to eat. The other people wanted to have power. So there has always been such a large population of sapiens, of humans on earth. There will always have to be people in charge. How do these people govern? Well, they typically exercise control through force, because you might have a democracy, but behind the democracy are the powers that proclaim democracy, the judiciary, the authority of parliamentary power. Well, that's what they present to people who choose to believe it, because in reality, those who govern are a specific group of people mentioned in my book, as we've discussed 3 times, a secret group called Scam, which is the one that governs the entire current world order that has evolved, forming gradually over time, and they exist. It's an order that, well, because it has control over everything and everything that's going to occur. Right now, we observe that here. Russia desires Ukraine, and on one side they tell you, no, this, that, yes. Who has an interest in a conflict over Ukraine? So if you find yourself in a confrontation, and let's say people are contemplating, they might ask who has an interest in a conflict over Ukraine. Not even Ukraine. In other words, if they went to war over Ukraine, Ukraine would be destroyed to the masses. Why are they forcing Ukraine to go to war? And who is forcing Ukraine to go to war? The Ukrainian leaders who were flirting with NATO, who want to join NATO. Who are we free to choose, but free to choose what? Nobody here is free to choose anything. You belong to a block. And what Russia cannot allow you, and you know it, Ukrainian leadership is, they won't ever give you that. They'll never let you do that. Why are you messing with that? Why are you putting ideas into these sapiens? If you tell the sapiens NATO won't do well, the Ukrainian sapiens will say, yes, NATO is better because it defends us from Russia. But who will defend you against Russia? When Russia messes with you, they'll tear you apart and leave you alone. Russia will be condemned and embargoed with stories told, but Ukraine will be the one destroyed. How can these leaders be so foolish? I tell you, I discuss such cases in my book. How can they be so foolish? So foolish. So foolish that they don't even consider it. Who will benefit from this? Certainly not the Ukrainian population. Not Ukraine clearly is in trouble for being Russia's neighbors. They are screwed. They know they are limited to what they can do. Like Finland, and Finland was able to manage when the Soviet Union was there. Those are much smarter. Those know that with Russia, they're not going to play, or with the former Soviet Union. And look, there they have held their own. And yet, these Ukrainians, well, and then, as they said to them the other day, don't you remember when the Germans invaded, what happened to you? And who got you out of that? Well, it was the Soviet Union that freed you. What do you want now? To reverse the omelet? So I tell you, these are things I read, I see, I say, but these people in Ukraine, the uproar today with Ukraine, but what does Ukraine aim to do? What freedom do you have to choose? Look at Cuba when the Russian missiles were there. How free were they to choose? That's why the minister said, this issue is Dabro. Well, you want to put missiles here in Ukraine. I send you missiles to Cuba again, and I send you to Venezuela. How would you react? How would you react? I don't know if you understand me. Then they are sending us into the world. All these people, and they will say they are people of light and the Russians are people of darkness. No, they're all people of darkness. And the Ukrainian leaders themselves who want to take their country to destruction because they are going to take it one way or another. If you allow the Russians to invade it, is because they are asking for it. I mean, don't provoke someone who is much more powerful than you. Why are you going to provoke if you are living well as you are living? And let's go back 7 or 8 years ago when there was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine. And we had that famous move of so-called Maidan Square, do you remember? With hundreds of thousands of people. So what happened? They replaced a pro-Soviet government with a pro-Western one, aiming to put them in the cream. How will the neighbors react? We must tell people the truth. See the outcomes. But Ukraine will be the big focus because we went to Afghanistan, spent 20 years, left as best we could. And who remembers Afghanistan now? The disastrous exit? Who remembers Afghanistan anymore? What do you want to get into now in Ukraine? But against an enemy of Kiev, because they know it is going to be a conventional war, because you can't get nuclear weapons. Because look, if Ukraine gets a nuclear destruction, where are our thinking heads? To think that Ukraine can lead you to nuclear destruction, we are stupid. These are things that I tell you that I find it hard to understand. When the simplest solution could be to just tell them, look, Ukraine, you are not part of NATO. Go ahead and democratically choose your government, whether it is pro-Western or pro-Russian, but do it there and stop causing disturbances. Just live your own life. You've been on the border with Russia. You were once part of the Soviet Empire, and you've been under Russian influence for centuries. So this isn't something new. What exactly do you want now? Are you trying to destabilize the entire region? All these things are the ones that come up in the book among the conversations between them, because they, of course, discuss all this. All these issues. What happens? That we go to Afghanistan to look for bin Laden? Are we going to make them all Democrats? Well, but that democracy thing is a very liberal thing. They have never been like that. They don't believe in it. Why do you want to impose it on them? And who is going to impose it on them? Well, it is going to be imposed by a series of lords of the government of lords, the most corrupt government ever known in history. From there, they took all the money that came in. And we were defending that. What were we defending? 2 trillion later, many times. That's why I'm telling you light and darkness. What are all these people? They are pure darkness, even though they come disguised as light and use light to bring darkness.
Manuel, as we are getting closer to the end of the program, I would like to ask you, what is one of the questions that perhaps our audience has asked us the most when they saw the title 22, The War of the Gods, in your book? That war is an inner war, a war that is lived in society, in politics. As you mentioned in your book, where is it fought, and when do you know if you win or lose?
For the war is waged on all fronts. It is waged on this earth, it is waged in the afterlife, in the place of exploration, and in the place of learning. It is a continuous war. The war is never over. This game of the gods is an ongoing game, and we are but their pawns. They move us, they use us. And we are the sacrificed ones in the end, because the gods do not lay the dead. When the Muslims confronted the Christians, then Jesus or Christ, Jehovah, and on the other side Allah, the ones who died were the people. The gods were guarding their paradises, and the one who died went there. Where did he go? I don't know. Ask them where they went after they died. I, at least in my book, give a hope. I say that there is a place of learning, one place of exploration, and that when we die, we are free to go to one or the other. But in the book, it's clear that the one who moves from light to dark, from learning to exploration, never returns. He never returns. He never returns. Because the end of the God's rebellion, Lucifer's rebellion, in the Bible is a rebellion for free will. Beware, people can do what they want, for good or bad, and society must handle that. If people come here who are stealing, who are murdering, that society has to defend itself against that logically. But technically, that person has been free to do whatever he wants. You are there to respond, to protect yourself. Are you light? Are you darkness? Well, it's often darkness protecting itself from darkness itself. Because Hitler versus Stalin were two dark beings that were pitted against each other. But of course, we try to say, well, but they were very bad, two dark figures. But then look, General de Gaulle left France and handed the hot potato to Pétain. Then Pétain was condemned as a traitor for betraying France, as he claimed, to protect what might be France's. I didn't have enough army to face Hitler, that I was going to let them destroy Paris, that they would destroy everything, that it was better to fight or surrender to reach an agreement with them. And that is a very big policy. Always in the history of phrase was to be of light or to be of darkness. But he was more of a light than many of us because he preserved many lives of his population. And in the end, he managed to recover France with the help of other allies. But he did not destroy his country. Just like the Belgians, the Dutch, they all surrendered quickly. They all surrendered quickly. They did not let them be destroyed like Poland and all that, or like Germany or Russia. In the end, I think they were, you can say, they were cowards. The nation, the nationalism. What is the use of being a dead nationalist? And these are all questions that are asked through the characters in my book. What good does it do to be a dead nationalist? That you are going to be a hero. You end up there with a monument. What good does that monument do you to remember your memory? If you have died, if you have left your family without a father or mother, I don't know what good that monument does him. It does serve as a source of pride. Look at my father for what he did. But he is dead. These are all the issues that are seen in the book through the characters and each story that we see. What I want the reader to understand is that good and evil, light and darkness, is something that touches each other. That sometimes it can be light, but 5 days later, it can be totally dark. I mean, here we see people, this whole Black Lives Matter movement that we see now, kill black citizens. Apparently, light citizens, religious people who go to their churches, are light or are they dark? They kill them for a set of principles that they believe are principles. So they are individual and they are right and they are defending themselves. That depends on how you look at it. And that's all that's in question in my book, which is light and which is darkness.
Manuel, in reflecting on this, I would like to ask you, what is the purpose of your book? Is it to raise awareness or to describe something beyond just a novel? Is it about the idea that we might be living in a matrix, entangled with vested interests that are battling for our energy, our emotions, and our vitality? Are we operating in an emotional environment where light and darkness are connected to our beliefs, our faith, and our quest for peace? Why is it that we live in conflict? What would be the purpose that you have mentioned in your book?
Well, my book is basically a purpose for people, for those who read it, to ask themselves questions, to reflect, to see the characters. In my book, all the characters are real in the sense that they are light, darkness. Hitler, in my book, is real. The only thing I study is Hitler because he did it. We go, as we have talked about other times, to the life of Christ. Christ in my novel is real. He has a purpose in the end. What is left of the teachings of Christ today, which, as we have spoken to you many times about the 325, are the basis of the Western world, and what is left of people with other ideologies, new modern religions such as communism, such as Mao Zedong in today's China. Today's China is a China that, well, there it is. They can no longer be caught up. So what are they going to do? Are they good or are they bad? I don't know. Ask the Chinese. I think a large part of the Chinese are very happy with the system they have because it is the only one they have ever known. So people are not good or bad because others label them as good or bad. If those Chinese people agree to live the way they live and we do not know, that does not work. Here we have to introduce a Western model where the political party is chosen, One of them is always one or the other. That's what we must do in China. They'll look at you unconvinced, and maybe we'll face an army of 3 million Chinese against 3 million Westerners. And who will die? Those soldiers. The regimes will remain, the Chinese with their communism, and will keep our democratic capitalism. No one wins. You can't impose ideas. Ideas come from persuasion. And neither we are convinced by communism, nor they are convinced by capitalism. So some are not convinced by Christianity, and others are not convinced by Islam. Through the centuries, we have tried to convince each other with swords and shots. We are still the same. As I was telling you, talking about Harari's book, The New Religions, Capitalism, Communism are new religions. It was like when we used to expect, well, the cross versus the crescent is the same thing. The world hasn't changed. It has evolved. There are different perspectives, but fundamentally, it's the same. Opposing poles and ways of understanding life will always exist. This is reflected in the rebellion of the gods, Lucifer's rebellion in the Bible. My novel shows that there will always be opposites, and for light to exist, darkness must too, or else light couldn't shine. How much does this light shine? Well, I do not know. Look at the world today, see if that light is shining. Those are the conclusions of my novel. That is, my novel is skepticism. Thinking, but rational thinking. What I advocate is rational thinking. As I was telling you before about the Ukrainian case, we have to be rational. Who benefits from this conflict? The Ukrainians the least, so why do they provoke it? And that's what I show in my novel. I look for a rational thinking outside of all ideologies. My book has no ideologies. That is, many ideologies are expressed through the characters. But it is a book without ideology. A book based on rational thinking, where we see things as they are and how they can affect us who live in these societies. That they affect us, well, they affect us a lot. But we also do nothing to change them many times because we cannot change them. Many times, in order to keep your head, your life, and so on, it is better not to get into a fight.
Finally, we are asked much we as human beings can rebel against the gods.
No. If we are part of the gods, what is a rebellion against the gods? Against which gods will you rebel? That is, against which god? If you are part of any of them?
Depending on your nature, if you are light, you would rebel against the darkness, and if you are darkness, you would rebel against the light.
But that's what we've done throughout history. How do we rebel? By fighting. It's all we've learned. What we need is a different kind of rebellion, which seems impossible, because to rebel against the gods, as the rebellion of darkness is, requires intellectual rebellion. Among the 8 billion sapiens here, how many have the intellectual capacity to rebel against the gods? The rebellion was always armed. There's never been an intellectual rebellion, but an intellectual rebellion has to be supported by a serious base, because if not, they finish you off. That is, it is not to say that I want this. I want this. If I can have it, if it is logical, if I in Ukraine want to join NATO, I know it is crazy. Why do I pursue it? But the problem is that the others are prodding them to do it. I am not sure if I'm being clear enough. Once more, returning to this issue, as it is a major topic around the globe. If people are concerned, what will occur? Well, ideally, nothing should occur if they were somewhat reasonable individuals, starting with the Ukrainians themselves, because in my view, the The main actors in this situation are the Ukrainians, and they are the ones who need to express their opinions, and they should definitely say it now. We wish to be independent from the entire world. Sadly, we wish to join the Western NATO world, but with Russia as our neighbor, we cannot. So we remain as we are. That would be the most sensible choice for thoughtful people, for those who consider their citizens. What benefit is it to those people if tomorrow the Russians invade and massacre them? What benefit is it? What benefit do all the Western countries gain by sanctioning Russia? Do you think Russia will pay sanctions forever? How long until they build a new economic system with China? That makes the West irrelevant or less affected by Western sanctions? If Russia stops gas to Europe tomorrow, they'll feel the cold this winter. Simply put, all due to Ukraine. Why? Because Ukrainian leaders had to speak up. Gentlemen, it is clear to us what our political status is. We are not aligned with anything. We are independent, and we refuse to accept anything from NATO. We have no desire to discuss NATO. We wish to remain uninvolved with the former Soviet Union. We do not want to stand alone here. We are a neutral nation similar to Switzerland. Switzerland has managed to endure through world war. No, I do not wish to argue with anyone. I am present here. I am not with anyone. I'm here on my own terms. Ukraine can't do the same. I tell you, these are things I find incredible to understand. But the Ukrainian rulers themselves, who influence all these people, to say they want NATO, or if Russia invades, even with NATO, they will tear Ukraine apart. Look at the weaponry amount. I think that 4 lakh tons of armament have been, but who benefits from that? You think that they are giving away that armament? Someone is going to have to pay for it. So what does that get them? Well, to accelerate an unnecessary pulse in the world. And like everything else, when you enter a conference, it starts as a dialectic, because it can be a dialectic at the end of the weapons by some incompetents who are governing you. Those people who are light or darkness, but light and darkness everywhere. They are all darkness. Because let's get to the point of cockiness. Well, I put this because I do it because I want to. Yes, now I'm going to see who is the cockier of the two. And in the end, who pays? Well, the population. In the end, they are the ones who pay, the population. And that's all. Jesus, and that is my novel. In this is a reflection for the people, because every day we go more and more, as we have spoken again, towards strong powers, so to have democracies, more or less here. Yes, I choose my representatives, but who are those representatives in the end? In the end, you are going to follow some parameters, because that is what history leads you to. We know that democracy for the Western world has been the most successful system ever known in history. Because it has been successful in the Western world does not mean that it is successful for Russia or for China or for the Arab world. Who exactly are we to impose our own success and culture on others? That is the reflection I hope to leave you with as the conclusion of my book. Although, of course, there are many other chapters, and we will discuss them in other programs.
Manuel, could you tell us where we can find your book? You often mentioned that there are several ways to obtain it. Besides the printed version, are there other formats available or places to get it?
Well, yes, you have what is normal, an ebook, and in audio and audible. You can listen to it in English or in Spanish at a normal price. That is, because in Audible, you buy it for a credit of $13.99, and you can listen to the whole book. It's like 24H. It's a long book, but it's also not that long. When you see the book, normal. It looks like it's very fat, but it's because they decided to make the font bigger. Because a lot of people, when they're reading the book, like to underline, stop, and all that. So I've increased the font size, making the book appear thicker than it actually is. I read it in 24 hours. It's not extremely long. It's not a short book, but it's not that lengthy either.
Thanks a lot, Manuel. See you next time.
See you, Jesus.